I'm Rob.
And I'm Bill, and you're listening to the Teach and Live Abroad podcast.
Bill, I have a question for you.
Sure, what's that, Rob?
What exactly is teaching English? Can you define that?
Teaching English, that's a tricky one. There's a lot of different types of English teaching. What are you trying to figure out?
Right. It's not so easy to answer this question. And that's because the idea of teaching English abroad sounds straightforward, but actually, this is far from the truth. And this is because there are many types of schools, programs, students, and situations that affect how or what you teach. So you could be teaching children's songs to 6-year-olds in the morning, and by the evening you're teaching adults how to make a sales pitch. You might see your students once a week or several hours a day. In this episode, we will take a look at the different types of English language programs available around the globe. We'll discuss topics like the various language programs you may encounter, identifying school culture, immersion versus non-immersion timeframes, franchise schools, and terms like EFL versus ELL. Then finally, as a sum up, we will help you think about where you may fit in all of these models and discover where you may eventually teach and live abroad. Welcome to the Teach and Live Abroad podcast, where we discuss, banter, and chat about all things teaching and living abroad.
And today's episode is sponsored by EITESLjobs.com. EITESLjobs.com is an online resource for posting teaching jobs, finding teachers, or finding a teaching job overseas. That's EITESLjobs.com.
Hey, Bill, episode 2, we finally got started.
Yeah, a few technical difficulties. We're here.
Technical difficulties from the tech guy. We're 2 hours late recording this.
Yeah, we got to sort it out though. All right. Anyway, microphone problems.
So today's if you listened to last week's episode or the first episode, that was all about preparing yourself to get a job, like get up to that interview for teaching abroad. So we went through resume building and all of those fun topics. If you haven't listened to that, it's really informative. And so this second episode, we want to talk about, we want to give an overview of the English teaching profession, and because there's lots of facets to it, and there's lots of choices and job directions that teachers can consider. So we started out with what exactly is teaching English. It's hard to answer because it's so vast. There's so many different programs and kinds of teaching around. So we want to give everyone, our listeners, some insight into this. And when you're done listening, you'll kind of might feel, okay, I have a better understanding about where I want to go, or maybe the direction I want to change to.
Yeah, when you first think of teaching overseas, right? You might have one impression of going into kind of a normal classroom, teaching a certain age student, and maybe you're thinking you're going to be teaching English at a kind of a normal conversation level.
Right. Yeah.
Right, which is often far from the case. Rob, what was your first teaching experience when you came over here?
Right. So for me, when I came over, and again, I had no idea where I was going to teach. So I came to Taiwan. So I went from the United States to Taiwan, and I had a job at the Kaohsiung American School, and I was the ESL teacher, the English as a second language teacher. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I walked in 2 weeks before, and I had to fill out lesson plans for all these different classes that I was going to teach. And I was teaching students from kindergarten all the way up to high school. And these were students who were not native English speakers. They were from all over the world. And for whatever reason, their parents were in Kaohsiung working, and they were coming to our school to get an English language curriculum, an American curriculum education. So I was teaching everything from singing songs to helping students to read to, gosh, I sometimes I had no idea what I was doing. And I I asked my headmaster once, I said, what exactly should I be teaching in this class? And he said, literally, he said to me, teach him English. And I sort of went, oh God, okay.
And
So it
you
was
were
very
putting all
tough.
this in,
Yeah.
you were putting all of the lesson plans together. Like there was no
Yeah.
team or like
Nothing.
materials for you or.
Nothing. And I didn't have an education background. So it was brand new to me. I was 22 years old and I was, I had 2 weeks to get ready and I never met the students or anything like that. So it was very, very tough start.
Baptism by fire.
Yeah. Baptism by fire. And I remember my kindergarten class and there weren't that many students. There were 12. I knew some Chinese already. I could speak some Mandarin and they just suddenly during the middle of class started shouting da bien, which is poop, poop, poop. And one of the students started shouting it. And then in unison, all 12 of them started shouting da bien, da bien. And it was just and loud at the top of their lungs. And I just stood there and went, oh God, what have I gotten myself into? It was like the second week I was there. But luckily there were I had some great coworkers there who really helped me out in the first couple months.
Did you have a co-teacher?
I didn't have a co-teacher, but
classroom?
just other teachers who were more experienced.
Oh, okay,
than I was
okay.
From all over the world. Yeah, they one of them took me under her wing and got me going.
Showed you the ropes.
So, yeah, so that was really, I had no idea. How about you? Was it, you started in Taiwan as well, right?
Yeah. So I was working in the States for quite a few years, and then I decided finally, after a friend of mine had been writing me and saying, hey, you should come to Taiwan. It's a great place. There's lots of work here. Live in another country. I finally came over here, and I started working at their school, and this school. It wasn't international. It wasn't an international school. It was just a local English language school, and most of the teachers, like yourself, I had very, very little teaching background. I used to sing songs at camp and things like that, and
That was
be
about
an
me
activity.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like I had some kind of instructional sort of, myself being like a camp counselor in that position. But when you're stuck in a classroom with 25, 30 sometimes kids that are really young, and they say, the owner or the head teacher says, here, you have your class is an hour long. You have to teach them this song, and all the kids have to be super excited and having fun. And at that time, that was English teaching. Was the kids had to have a good time.
That was the standard, right? Just make sure they're having fun.
Right. And the parents would complain if their kids went home and said, the class wasn't fun. It had nothing to do with whether or not they were learning English. So anyway, yeah, that was my first experience. It was like, here you go, teach this song. And there were very few kind of like guidelines in terms of how you did that. Teach this activity with the kids or whatever, or teach these words. And you were just dropped in and here you go. And then,
But you didn't have those students all day, did you?
no, there was those were afternoon classes for like 2.5 hours. But when I was first teaching here, I was also teaching in. I taught every different level of students. Like I would teach middle school, high school, even college or university students here when I got to Taiwan. But the English, the language ability of those students was all really different. So you're like, jumping from total beginner to people who could speak English quite well, who had a pretty good grasp of the language, just all across the board. So,
right, so this is a good example of what, when we ask what exactly is teaching English, that's a perfect example. And there's so many different styles in your day or in your week that you have to teach, and different kinds of students you have to teach. There's not one uniform way to do this.
yeah, absolutely. And some teachers come they come to a foreign country and they settle in to a particular kind of like a age level or a type of school where they can, they're teaching the same class all year long, and that's their primary focus or primary job, which is great. But a lot of teachers I know go to Japan, Korea, Thailand, Taiwan, and other places, and they're teaching students of all ages, all levels. So it can be very challenging.
You become very versatile after a while.
Yep.
You can walk in
Yeah.
at different age levels and different English levels as well.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, that's pretty funny. Your situation was way different than mine. I think I had a good start. So
Yeah.
let me start by defining some of school and education terms that are often used when teaching abroad. And these are some terms you might often hear. And the first one, and we already mentioned one, is the difference between ESL, EFL, and ELL. Okay, so ESL is a commonly used term. It means English as a second language. EFL is English as a foreign language, and ELL is English language learner. Now, ESL, English as a second language, is often misused, and because what that means is that's a situation. For example, you're in the United States, and there are immigrant students that come in, and their English is the main language in the school, but they're learning their main language is not their native language is not English. It's a different language, like say Spanish. So they're learning English as a second language. So ESL, this term is used for countries that where the native language is English, but there are students who are learning it as a second language. That's ESL. So when we're in Asia, we don't want to use ESL. That's often misused here. Now, EFL is the one we want to use. EFL is English as a foreign language. And what that means is that students are, say, for example, in Taiwan, where we are, their native language is Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. So they are learning English as a second, like a foreign language, not a second language, as a foreign language. It's totally foreign to their situation, what they're living in. That's what when you go abroad, most students are learning English in that way. Now, ELL has become this more general term that really encompasses both of these groups. ELL is English language learners. So an English language learner is exactly what that says. It's a student who is learning English. So that can encompass ESL and EFL students. But that term, I didn't pick up that term until I started my master's degree more. But most normal teachers don't know what ELL is. They're going to use ESL or EFL.
Yeah, isn't that what most people say when they describe what they're doing? They're teaching ESL overseas, oftentimes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's actually misused. It's misused. So I want to say, even though ESL is misused, most people around the world know, most teachers know what that means. It means you're going to be teaching English somewhere else, ESL.
What do you how would you describe like immersion versus non-immersion language acquisition?
Okay, so we were just talking about our first teaching experiences abroad, and so right nowadays you're going to see these programs that can be described as immersion or non-immersion programs, and this affects language acquisition, and it's more about the exposure and time to the language. So an immersion program is when students are, and let's talk about it in a week. Within a week, they're going to have a lot of English lessons or exposure to the English language in school. So I like to say maybe 6 hours or more a week would be an immersion program. So at my schools, which are language schools in Taiwan, our students come 10 hours a week. Some of them are there every day or almost every day for 2.5 hours. So they get 10 hours of English a week. But if you can even go further, if you're in a bilingual school or in an American school, of course, that's going to be full on immersion where you're getting lots and lots of exposure every day.
And exposure, does that also include the time outside of the classroom? Like, will you say, oh, this school is more of an immersion program, has an immersion program because like it's an all English in class and outside of class kind of school?
Definitely. That definitely matters as well. Right. If you're in the class, but then you come out of the class and you're back to your native language, of course, that's gonna, that can affect the amount of exposure that you're getting.
Yeah. And I think there's a trend, certainly a trend, there has been for the last many years, a trend towards insisting that kids speak English inside and outside of the classroom time at the school, right?
Right. That's hard to do, but yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of schools
especially
try to
for
do that.
kids that Yeah, if their language level is not that great, their English is still like a kind of beginner English. Okay.
And that's difficult
Cool.
even at an American school, for example, where a lot of the students say are Taiwanese, and they're getting full on immersion English every day, but when they're hanging out at the lunchroom, they're probably speaking Chinese. It's very
Yeah.
interesting, you know. So
Yeah.
so immersion and then non-immersion is basically under that, like the amount of time a week that you're exposed to the language or taking language classes. It could be just 40 minutes a week, or maybe it's 2 hours, or it's an hour. It could be a variety of times, different times. And I think a lot of language schools around Asia are non-immersion. So you're not getting a lot of time exposure to the language. And that slows down the acquisition of the language, obviously. It just makes sense. The more time, the better acquisition. The fewer time, less time, then it's going to be slower acquisition. If any.
Yeah, I think a good example of sort of the non-immersion setting is what a lot of schools, like elementary schools here, try to implement. And I think I would
schools, right?
Right. I would imagine that's similar in other countries where the students are in school all day long using their mother tongue, their local language, and then they have 20 minutes a day or 40 minutes twice a week of English. And it's completely not immersion learning, right? It's very, very limited time, very basic English. So I think that happens a lot, but less and less in Taiwan anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not. It all comes down to how much time. How much do you want to learn the language, or do your parents want you to learn? It comes down to finances. It comes down to time, or access to the language, right? But this reminds me, like, if you think about, I don't know, in high school in the States, I took Spanish for 4 years, and that was totally non-immersion, right? That was 2 hours a week, two 50-minute classes a week for 4 years, and my Spanish was not very good, not very good at the end. I mean, I think a lot of students around the world have this story. Oh, I took the language for so many years, and at the end, it wasn't very good. Did you take
French?
Yeah,
French,
I've never heard you speak any French.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak a little bit of French, but most of it is long gone.
You know, all the research now says, acquisition happens. It's best when you're younger, when you're a younger child. It happens in those first 12 years, and you have to go often. It's exposure to the language. So 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week is not going to cut it. But there are plenty of schools around the world that still do that. And whether it's a waste of time or not, I don't know. You learn a little bit, but you're not going to acquire the language to a proficient level.
Yeah.
So
you have to. It's clear you need to spend the time.
And the reason we're bringing this up is because if you're going to go get a job abroad, you're going to be in one of these situations. And I prefer immersion. I think a lot of teachers prefer an immersion situation because they see the progress of the students much more quickly.
Yeah, when I mentioned that teaching job, it was a little frustrating as a teacher, just like what you were just describing, where you would teach a group of kids for, I don't know, it was like a month or two or whatever, and you would get them up to a certain level, but that was really it. And then you would get a new class, a brand new class of kids who couldn't speak any English, and you kind of had to start over again.
Yeah.
So you were constantly teaching at that really, really basic level and seeing a little bit of progress, but not enough because you didn't spend enough time with the kids.
Yeah, the ceiling is really low. It's a low ceiling. Yeah.
It took weeks to get the kids up to a level where they could follow along in a song. And that was kind of, that was almost met the expectation, and you moved on to like a new class. So be aware, immersion, non-immersion programs. And again, there's a lot of non-immersion around. There is still a lot of that. So again, it's just time, finances, those all come into play. So, and the last thing I want to mention is just types of schools that you could encounter. So we've mentioned language schools, which I have 2 in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, and they're private schools. Students come to learn the English language at my school. That's what we do.
We teach the English language. And there's lots of these schools in different countries and different variations all over the world. And so that's a language school. And then you have a bilingual school. And bilingual schools they could be private. Some of them, are they public ones? There could be public ones where students are learning subjects in their native language, but they also have more English classes throughout the week. And then you have public school. If you get a public school job, you might be an English teacher in the public school. And so English is part of the government program, but it's probably most likely non-immersion. You might see students once a week.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay? So there we go. So we've got a little bit of overview there of what you might encounter. So now we want to break down we want to go a little bit more detailed into some of these kinds of schools. We'll go by age levels. And we'll just give you a little bit of information and share some of our experiences. So the first one I want to start with was kindergarten. So kindergarten and preschool teaching, it's pretty prevalent everywhere. Especially in Asia, you could come over as an ELL teacher and be slotted into kindergartens. And let's be clear, kindergarten means age 3, 4, and 5, 6. So to me, that's pre-K. Like there's even pre-K classes going on. 3-year-olds.
Sorry, I was just I'm gonna throw something in here. When you reminded me when I was first teaching.
Yeah.
Preschool, it's very common. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear about other places, but in Taiwan, it's very common to be teaching 2 and 3-year-olds that have diapers. Seriously,
Yes.
that are wearing diapers. I'm not kidding.
I've heard of that.
So
too.
when I was a teacher, one of the things we had to do was recognize, this kid needs to be changed. And that actually was in a classroom with, 15 or 20 of these kids that were 3 years old. So that's, I think, an experience that a lot of teachers will have when they first go overseas.
Yeah, you got to, you don't know that you're going to get into this situation. You get hired, you're like, oh, kindergarten, great. I'm going to see, 5-year-olds. This is wonderful. And then you go in and there's 2 and 3-year-olds. Yeah, in diapers.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
And it was hard. It was hard to kind of get over that idea that I was, helping take care of kids in diapers.
And these classes can be like 25 to 30 students.
Right.
And so you can imagine, I'm telling you, every year there are young teachers who don't have a lot of experience that take a job, they go over somewhere, and they're thrown into a class of 25 3-year-olds. And here's a song, like you said before, here's a song, we want you to do the song and dance around and do that. And that's your job.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're not doing that all day. But yeah, there are teachers that do that. And I don't know, the whole question is, does that really help? Is there any language acquisition going on? It's really hard to say. It goes back into that immersion, non-immersion argument. How much do you need to start acquiring? Of course, 2 and 3-year-olds can acquire the language very easily if you do the right things with them.
Super fast.
Yeah, but you can't expect to be teaching them for an hour an hour for that age group is it's like a whole day to them.
If you have the patience, those are some of the most rewarding teaching experiences because those kids absorb that information so quickly.
They really do.
Right.
But you need to have activities and sing and move around, and you need support in the class. And sometimes schools do not offer that. The onus is on you as the native English speaker to take care of that. The school has an organized program. They've got you doing activities that are suited for that age group, like moving around, singing, doing quick exercises, and on a consistent basis, on a repetitive basis every day of the week. That's a program that's going to be successful and the students will actually progress in the language. They're going to pick up the language very naturally. But if you're in a situation where here's a song and you have an hour, deal with it, and you're only going to see these kids once a week, that's, not much acquisition is going to be, language acquisition is going to be happening then. So these are situations you could encounter, and it just depends on the school that you end up at. Okay.
And it's pretty demanding. I think that's one thing that
Right. Yeah.
as a
Physically,
teacher,
it's exhausting.
right, right. I mean, when you come over here as a young person outside, after finishing university and whatever, it's a perfect time if you're interested in teaching in that type of setting, because it takes a lot of energy. You're on your feet all day. You're dancing, singing, and in very active situations with kids. So it is very demanding.
It's
physically.
constant, and it's loud. It's loud in there. You have to think on your feet. You don't see many. I'm going to say you don't see many 30-year-olds doing that job. It's really teachers who are in their 20s and early 20s that have the energy to do it. And I don't think there's a lot of how do you say it, longevity in doing those jobs. I think that you can get burned out on them pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I know the teaching for very young kids, like you said, there's the different types there's immersion and non-immersion. So I think if you're teaching young kids and you're in more of a traditional kind of like kindergarten setting where you have a whole day and you're doing activities with the kids that are not just singing and dancing, that kind of teaching, I think, can be more rewarding, or just different, but more of a long-term experience where you might be teaching kindergarten for many years, but you're not just singing and dancing in front of kids.
Right.
Right.
I'll give you an example of this. In Thailand, I got my master's in education in Bangkok. I finished it in Bangkok, and Bangkok is full of these schools that are private schools, but they're all English. So you go there and you learn all of your subjects in English, but you don't have, all the students are from Thailand, or they're from foreign students living in Bangkok. And the teachers that taught pre-K there, I met some of them, taught pre-K and K there. They were certified teachers, and they were not singing and dancing all day. They had all the latest techniques, organizations, curriculum, all at their disposal, and they organized full days with these young students, 3 and 4-year-olds. They were pre-K students. Yeah, but you're talking about teachers who are certified and who've done some extra training with maybe the IB program, things like that. So
right.
they know what it takes to help these pre-K students acquire the language.
So what about the primary school, junior high, high school levels? Let's describe that for our listeners. What are teachers going to be encountering? What are the type of situations that you'll often see with students that are a little bit older teaching English in a foreign country?
Right. So there's a vast differences in programs and kinds of schools for primary school students and junior high school and high school. There's a variety of them. And each country will be different. Again, is it public? Is it private? Are there language schools? So I'll say again, the devil is in the program and in the school culture as well. Let me talk about my schools. My schools in Kaohsiung are immersion. I mentioned before, they're 10 hours a week. Some kids come 6 hours, some come 4. And in Taiwan, elementary school students only go to school a half a day. Most of the time, grade 1 to grade 6. It varies as they get older, but there's a lot of days where they leave school at noon. So they have entire afternoons free. So what's happened is that this language school business has come up as a way for students to spend their afternoons while their parents are working. So kids are learning English. But a lot of countries, like for example, China, kids go to school all day there, or public schools all day. So they're going to have these language schools, but they're going to go at night, or they're even going to go on Saturdays. So you're going to see schools where it goes back to immersion, non-immersion. You're going to see schools like at my school where kids can come every day, but most of the time you're going to see situations where students are coming twice a week, or even once a week, maybe 3 times a week. And they might be coming in the evenings, and they might be coming on Saturdays as well. And Saturday school is no big deal here. And what are they going to be learning? Well, they could be learning anything from speaking and listening to reading. Is there a reading program? A lot of schools teach grammar too early, but their students are learning a lot of English grammar. And some of them are learning, hopefully they're learning phonics to help them to read and comprehend. And then there's writing components thrown in there as well. And it's just a hodgepodge. It really is, there's nothing, it just depends on where you are and what kind of school you end up at to see what the direction of that program is in. What is the direction of the program? Where do they want to be in teaching their students?
And oftentimes, Rob, isn't that where they're, what material they're using or how they're teaching their kids in those schools? Isn't oftentimes that that based on this concept they have to do well in their tests for their English language tests in their regular school? You know what I mean? So
I said, well, what's the goal here? Well, the goal is learning English, but actually the goal could be that the public school system has an English program, and students are going to be tested in the English in junior high school and high school, for example. So these schools are around to help cram those kids. Now I can use cram school here to help cram those students, cram the English into them so that they can pass their tests. And that's something that in Asia you see quite a bit of.
Yeah. A major component of those tests, and you mentioned grammar, is being able to use grammar correctly. So you'll find yourself, especially if you're teaching the students at those ages, you'll be teaching a lot of writing and grammar, not so much speaking, right? I mean, that was my experience when I went to, I taught in a junior high a couple times, and that's what I was doing. Basically, I was reviewing the grammar concepts and the language skills that they needed to be able to pass the tests for their junior high program.
That's kind of, I find it sad, but it's just because I don't know I really don't know if those schools help the students that much. I think it just puts more pressure on them to memorize and to just get through each unit so they can get through each test. Now, if you talk about a school like mine, we don't focus on that because we have young learners coming in. We have elementary school students coming in, and we're focusing on our own curriculum, and we're focusing on developing their language ability, helping them acquire the language as quickly as they can. So we're going to teach them how to read and teach them how to comprehend, and of course, speaking and listening exercises, and then put in some writing too. So our hope is that we create this English foundation for students to do well in junior high school and high school English programs in Taiwan. But you could end up in a school like mine where we have our separate program, or you could end up in a situation where you're just the foreign teacher coming in to practice speaking or to practice some grammar concept to help them pass tests.
Yeah, where your school is teaching, like the goal is a sense of kind of mastery of English, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mastering the English language as best you can with the kids, obviously, given the limited amount of time they have. But on the other hand, the public schools or like these other programs are often just very, very targeted areas of English, of the language, like grammar, some specific, So it's quite different, right?
And without getting into that, it's because the expectations are way too high and the program isn't really developed well to help students succeed. So they end up having to really, a lot of students here have a tough time with English in public school.
And that comes down to also, like you said, the devil is in the school, the materials, and the organization. A school like yours is so organized, and you've spent so much time on preparing the materials and training the teachers.
Updating them. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so many schools, they just still today, and I'm sure this is similar in other countries, they hand the teacher a book and say, go teach.
Yeah.
There's no planning.
Do unit 2.
Exactly. So you'll find yourself as a new teacher in these settings where you just have to wing it because the school doesn't really have a plan or a sense of organization or a director, like, someone running the school who really knows what they're doing.
100% school. And let's be honest, a lot of these schools, not a lot, I shouldn't say a lot. Some of these schools, it's just about making a profit.
Yeah.
And they might be a Chinese homework school that's offering English on the side. So what's the point of that? It's to just expose the students to some English. So
isn't that a case in China right now? Like, there's so many schools and there's such a market for it. You have a lot of people getting into the business just to make a buck.
Yeah. I think whenever there's the new markets, right? Taiwan was like this more in the 90s. Everybody opens a school because there's money to be made. I think Vietnam is like this as well now, but eventually it shakes out. It shakes out over time, and the cream rises to the top. And also, I think the consumer, right? The parents get a little bit more savvy on what they want, but they still exist here. They do exist in Korea and Japan, I think, too.
So, Rob, tell me about college level teaching. Is there university level teaching for teachers that are going to be traveling and working overseas?
There is, but these jobs are getting harder to come by because the requirements to teach at universities have risen. And I think nowadays you're going to need a master's degree at least. And most likely you'll be competing with PhDs to get these teaching jobs. And even the master's degrees, they might be required to be Masters of Education in TESOL, teaching English as a second language, or linguistics. So there's a specialty in English language teaching. So if you're coming over the first time and you're like, well, I just want to teach college students, you're probably going to have a hard time breaking into that kind of teaching job or breaking into those organizations. Now, public universities are going to be really strict on their requirements and what they want. Private universities might be a little bit looser. So if there are smaller private universities, wherever you end up, you might have a chance to get in and lecture in a class or teach a class like speaking or listening, those kinds of classes, even without a higher degree. But I think with universities, like everywhere in the world, it's, your networking really matters, and who how can you kind of sneak your way into one of these positions and work your way up. And those good university jobs, at least in Taiwan, we have a bunch of friends who teach at universities and they have PhDs, and they're not going to leave their jobs. I mean, that once they get good positions here, they're not going to leave them. So it's very difficult to come by. So I would think that for most places, private universities maybe will give you a chance to get a little taste of university teaching.
That's funny. When I was first in Taiwan, you asked about what I taught. Like my first job, I described that earlier, but actually one of the jobs I had was teaching at a university in Kaohsiung.
Hey,
and at that time, you didn't need, I know I had a college degree, but you didn't need like a master's or a PhD even to get a teaching job. And it wasn't, those teaching jobs weren't necessarily official. Do you remember this back kind of, years ago, like governments and, some of the universities in Taiwan had teaching positions that weren't necessarily like official teaching positions. So you weren't paid as well as like you weren't a regular university teacher. You were just there to teach English to students at the school.
Yeah,
did you do some of that?
Like a part-time lecturer or something like that, they call them.
Yeah. So those those oftentimes would lead to more full-time positions, but typically it would require a higher degree to get into like the full on if you're going to be a professor at the university, let's say.
And I think what's happened is also like a lot of local. Let's talk about Taiwan again. Just there are a lot of local Taiwanese that have gone abroad and gotten a PhD, and who can teach the English language really well. Their English is, almost fluent. And these teachers are also in the mix for these positions. So they don't need foreign native English speakers really that much anymore, unless you have a specialty. There are a lot more candidates around that can teach. So it's really difficult. It's difficult nowadays to get university jobs. But again, private universities might be more open to it. They might say, well, we have a class, and would you like to teach 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week? And they're most likely going to be non-immersion style, big groups, big classes, 40 students. And, that's the kind of teaching that you're going to do in a university. It's not going to be these small discussion groups and things like that.
The nice thing about teaching at that level, which I enjoyed, was you'd actually get into some interesting conversations with students.
Sure.
More like life and sort of life
Current
types
events, these kinds of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where
you might even go ahead.
I was going to say you could take the newspaper. Where I would take like a clipping from a newspaper, an article that came out in the English language news, and take that to class, and we would discuss that in class and pull out the vocabulary and create a lesson plan from that. But it was kind of fun because it was current events.
Yeah,
which I was. Yeah,
you're dealing with a more mature student body there, so they're going to be interested in some current events and things. And now you've got all these. You've got YouTube, for example. Boy, you can just pull things up and discuss TV shows or little news clips. So. Yeah, it can be really fun and interesting to teach those classes, especially if you've been teaching, younger students all day.
Yeah.
It can be refreshing. And let's say also, we talked about the younger students, how you need a lot of physical energy. Energy is important. Having energy, you're talking a lot. With university level, you don't have to deal with class management so much. You're not expending so much energy, physical energy. So as you get older, it's a nicer job to have as a teacher.
Right.
Bill, I often see a lot of ads for business English. And business English is popular in many countries. And what exactly are business English classes? Who's teaching them? And how do classes and companies work to make this happen?
Yeah, so there's quite a what we described in other teaching settings. There's a whole array of different types of business English programs. And every country has kind of expectations for the level of English someone in a business setting needs. More and more of those classes are expecting teachers to have some kind of a certificate for whether it's a TEFL certificate or something more than just a bachelor's degree to be teaching like a business English class. So in every country, you'll find like the Berlitz types of schools, Wall
Berlitz
Street
is a
English.
big one.
Right. Berlitz, Wall Street English. There's a program called JET, which is specific to Japan. Global Village that has locations all over Taiwan. There's quite a few schools that cater to business English students, and those, like I said, those are oftentimes, those schools are looking for teachers with some kind of certificate. But if you know somebody, I think in most places, in most countries, if you know somebody, if you have some connection, you can get into a position in a business English classroom setting. And typically those kinds of classes are, you will either create your own lesson plans from a kind of like business, a book that would describe different types of business settings, like preparing for a presentation or making a business phone call or a sales call or a customer support call, things like that.
An interview.
Yeah, exactly. So you're gonna sit down and do some kind of mock interviews with your students, and a lot of those are going to be really fun classes. It's not like we described earlier, the dancing, singing, and things like the real super active classes for the little kids. This is a little bit lower key, but it's a little bit more intellectual. You'll find that the students oftentimes not always, but oftentimes have a little bit better grasp of English. Some of the students are expected that, their English isn't very good. They're in a company. They need to speak English for some international situation or some event or something. So they kind of take a crash course in English. Where, on the other hand, you'll have students whose English is already really quite good, but they just want to improve their English in these different types of business settings.
Sound more professional, et cetera.
Right.
Maybe they're working to get a better job, et cetera.
Yeah. Or their companies sending them overseas, or they work at a bank and they're dealing with more international customers, and they want to be able to know how to communicate efficiently, proficiently with them in English.
I had a friend in Kaohsiung here in Taiwan who for a while was teaching, who was going to Costco, the big supermarket, American supermarket, Costco. And he would go twice a week and teach the staff at Costco. I don't know what he was, English, but I don't know what exactly he was teaching, what subjects. And also he got a job at IKEA, the Swedish furniture store, IKEA, doing the same thing for a short time. So he was going and teaching the employees on the floor how to communicate in English. I'm assuming because they have more and more international customers coming in speaking English. All right, let's move on here real quickly. Last kind of group we'll talk about is test preparation classes. And test preparation is a big business around the world. And there's all these English language tests that students can take for various goals that they have, either getting into a university in Europe or the United States, or for working in a company, or just for perhaps even a job in their local country to show that their English level is high enough. Some of them I'll run through. You've probably heard of TOEFL, Test of English as a Foreign Language. That's mostly for if you go to the university in the United States, you'll need to take a TOEFL test. TOEIC is a very popular one around the world. It's Test of English for International Communication. And the TOEIC is used by a lot of international companies to show that your English is up to a certain standard. And you're going to do, it's listening, speaking, writing, and reading. And that's been around a long time. And also IELTS is a big one for the British system for university, IELTS. And in the United States, like SAT for university, GMAT, for example, if you're going to get an MBA in the United States. And there are students all over the world that are studying and working on taking these tests to pass them for whatever their goal is. And there's a big business wrapped around this. It's just, can you find the school or a language center that is helping students prepare for this? And those can be hard to find.
Yeah, you'll find more of these schools that teach you certifications in bigger cities. For sure.
It's back to that, like the business English. Bigger cities are going to have these.
Yeah.
Most likely. So test preparation is another option. And, you have to search around for it, but you might find it and you may enjoy it. So.
SAT teaching is fairly popular in Taipei. I don't know about in Kaohsiung. Is it a thing?
There are some schools around that do that. 100%. Okay. Yeah, because it's the same thing. There are students that are looking to go to university after they graduate, Taiwanese students. So, and
TOEFL, TOEIC, those aren't sufficient if you're applying for a university, right?
Well, I think you need TOEFL is. Yeah,
not by itself though, but
not
you
by
oftentimes
itself.
Right.
If you can show that you can do well on an SAT, for example, that's a university might look a little bit more favorably upon that, because now you're competing with local American kids on their level. Where TOEFL is for students who are not native English speakers. Okay, Bill, we're getting close to the end here, and just really quick, I wanted to ask you about school franchises. Because usually when we think of franchises, we think of like McDonald's or Subway, these restaurants that have franchises all over the world. But actually, there are franchised English schools, language schools all around the world. And what are some of the pros and cons, or what are these franchises? Number one, how do they open? And two, what are the pros and cons maybe to working for them?
Yeah, so Rob, that's a really good question. Franchise schools are not really new, but they're definitely new relative to kind of when English teaching and language schools became popular, say 20, 30 years ago. So franchise schools are just kind of a school. You can think of them as sort of a school in a box, like a restaurant, like McDonald's or whatever. It's a franchise business where someone can come in with kind of, they are interested in this type of business, but they don't have all of the necessary skills, or they don't have the time to put all the materials together or understand how to hire people, things like that. So it puts some structure around this concept of like opening up a school. So I think franchises are really great in some sense in terms of being a teacher. So if you're looking for opportunities to find a job, if you're looking for a school and you're trying to decide which school to work at, I think it's important to understand that a franchise it can be a good place to work at, because in one sense they have a very standard structure for their class. They have a standardized set of teaching materials. Every class of a certain age of students learns a certain level in the class. They also oftentimes, I think I was in the franchising, I think you know this, years back, I was in the franchising business, right? So we started a business of creating a franchise program. We created a franchise program for schools so they could just take our kind of cookie cutter system and put it in place. And all they needed to do was hire the managers, have a place for the school, set it up, hire the teachers, whatever. So getting back to that, it can be very positive in that sense that you have a structure. The people running the school understand how to organize the school, what expectations should they have for foreign teachers. And also they have a system they can provide the teachers, not only for a curriculum, but also for training.
Okay.
Which is really important, right? Because as a teacher, especially if you're a new teacher, a school that provides training is going to offer you a much better experience and your students than a school that has no training.
I think if you see franchise school ads and jobs, don't be afraid of them. Some of them are probably good. You'll get some training, and it might be a good job to start off in. But again, I think I always say that the franchise schools are only as good as their local manager and their local director. One in one city might be very well run, but in another city it might not be run the same way. So
for sure.
So,
yep.
Yeah, so
every school, even though they have a franchise system, is going to really be a different experience, like you said, depending on who's actually running the school. The ownership. Yeah. Rob, I think this is a really good summary of the different types of experiences that you might encounter as a foreign teacher. Just keep in mind that there are very different experiences you'll have at every different level. And, if you get that first job and you don't really like, let's say you're teaching kindergarten, you don't really like it, just realize that there's teaching at every level. And there's opportunity to, tons of options. So, just keep keep an open mind, and keep your sights on what's next. And
and I hope this episode has given just what we intended: some more information, a good overview of what is out there. So, and if go live abroad, go teach abroad. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Rob, just a quick note. I listened to, I watched a YouTube video of this guy that taught in Japan for like 4 years. And it was really cool. He was from England. He joined this program to teach over in Japan. And he just described a lot of what we went over in this podcast, his experiences in, mainly in like a junior high teaching in public schools. And his experiences are really similar to some of the things that we've discussed. But the bottom line is, he said if he had been talking to himself, 4 or 5 years earlier, and that, he had asked, should I do this? His answer was definitely go teach overseas. And, you know, it was a life-changing experience for him. He doesn't regret it. He had a great time. He learned a lot. So it's not just about how much your students at any age learn. It's the whole experience with with your students and, yourself and your growth. Worth it.
That's a great point. It really is. And I've seen, my schools have been open 16 years. I've seen so many young teachers come in and really change and grow over a few years just by working at my school and maybe some other jobs outside of my school. It really, you just don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to change you, but it does. Did we answer our question about what teaching English actually is? Do you have any comments on that? Or, go ahead and send us a comment or a question about that, or maybe share your experiences. Are there other types of English classes that you teach? Maybe some interesting and funny ones? Share it with us. We'll read them. We'll bring it up in the next episode. And, what's your definition of what English teaching is? We'd love to hear it. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube.
Great. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and our Podbean URL is in the notes below. So, yeah. And we also want to thank, again, EITESLjobs.com for the support for the show. And again, EITESLjobs.com is a source for finding teachers or finding your next teaching job abroad. Thanks.
Okay, Bill,
Bye-bye.
Well done. Episode 2 in the books, and we'll see you in episode 3, everybody. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.